listening to I Am Refocused Radio with your host, Shemaya Reed. This show is designed to inspire you to live your purpose and regain your focus. And now, here's your host, Shemaya Reed.
Welcome to I Am Refocused Radio. Once again, we are here today, and today we have a true honor. We have a real treat for you all today. We have a true honor talking to a powerful storyteller, Timothy Mahoney. He's the CEO of Historic Pictures, and he is the creative force behind a new film that I hope you are ready to prepare yourself to watch. The film, The American Miracle, Our Nation is No Accident, is coming to theaters very soon, nationwide, June 9th through the 11th. I can't wait to talk about this film because it's packed with a lot of superstar power, a lot of great action. And if you will, this guy has a lot of history with filmmaking. I mean, we want to cut to the chase because I know his time is very precious. So I just want to say first and foremost, thank you so much for your time, sir. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me.
Well, I know you are super busy promoting this film. You have some legendary people part of this project. Let's talk a little bit about the first thing first. What was the vision behind the film? What sparked the idea for this project?
Well, this film came about by a book that was written right here, The American Miracle by Michael Medved, Divine Providence and the Rise of the Republic. And Michael had written a number of books, and he had been in one of my first films that was in theaters called Patterns of Evidence, The Exodus. And I got to know him probably 20 years ago. And later on, after that movie was in theaters and went worldwide on Netflix, he was writing books, and he, wrote this one. And he said, "Tim, would you help me make this film or this book into a film?" And we just took a little part of it because the book's got a lot of stories about providence. And the word providence, for some people, it's not a common word necessarily, but it means the presence of God is probably one good definition of it. It means that the founders could see something when they were 250 years ago, when all this was happening, that there was a sense of the presence of God that was involved in the nation, in the events of military battles, in George Washington's life, even in events of different people. We tell a broad story here. We share African American stories in this movie. We share the founder stories, and there's God's presence in a lot of this, and most people don't know about it. This is a forgotten story, and that's why it's so significant right now, because we're coming up to the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence.
You have, like I said in the intro, several feature films. How does this one differ from your past work when it comes to tone, message, or scale?
Yeah, well, this film is similar in some ways because the earlier films took a scientific approach called pattern of evidence. So a pattern of evidence is what scientists use. They have a hypothesis and they say, well, if this repeats itself like gravity, if I drop something and it keeps falling to the ground, there must be a law of gravity. Well, in this particular case, we were looking for God acting in history. Again, in American history. Earlier, I was looking for God acting in history in the Bible and the events in Egypt and in the story of the Israelites coming out of Egypt. And where is the Red Sea crossing and where is Mount Sinai? And so we would use that scientific approach there. When I was working at this, Michael actually, I think he even thought about calling something about patterns. There's, patterns of evidence in a sense of God acting in history in this book. And so what happened was, I felt that I was just jumping ahead by about 3,000 years or more. And I was now going to be showing evidence of God acting in American history. And to be honest with you, it was somewhat relieving because I'd been in the ancient history for so long. It was kind of fun to learn about this whole other forgotten story and to make a movie about it. And it's the biggest one I've ever made. It had 90 actors, so there's a lot of drama in this movie. The movie is called The American Miracle, Our Nation is No Accident. So we were telling the story of this from about 1750 And I chose the story of George Washington to focus on because he had probably the most documented events where near-death experiences where he should have died. He was shot at point blank at one time and somehow miraculously wasn't hit by the bullet. Then he fell into an icy river trying to escape back to the territory where he lived and didn't freeze. And he got smallpox and he didn't die. So he had all these different things. And people said, this man has a special protection on him. And then later on, he goes into this battle when the French had come into the area, I think, of Ohio River Valley, and the British didn't want the French to come into that part of the country, so they sent a large contingent with a general by the name of Braddock. He's a good general, and I think there were 5,000 to 7,000 people that were in that contingent of soldiers and other people, women and cooks and everything. And they got surrounded, and there was a massacre. And George Washington had almost all the officers. They shot all the officers, and a lot of them died. General Braddock actually died, and they shot at Washington. They were trying to shoot him. He was a big man, bigger than most, and he had 4 bullet holes through his clothing. His hat was shot off, and 2 horses were shot dead, from underneath him, and yet he was not killed or injured. And later on, there was a prophecy that was given by one of the Native American chiefs who was there, and he said that they tried to shoot him, and they prophesied. He prophesied over George Washington and said that he was being protected, and that God, I don't know if he used the word God, but he said there was a power, and he would be the leader of a great nation, a great empire. And so we tell that story in this film.
What's so impressive about that is you had a chance to work with some very exciting history to begin with. So my next question would be, when it comes to the actors, the cast, let's talk about Pat Boone. That name does not need an introduction. First of all, how were you able to secure that? And also, what does it mean to have someone like his status to be a part of this project?
Well, when I work on a film, I'm a prayerful person, and I'm praying about, well, who should I have, and I'm thinking about it. And I don't know, the thought came to me, why don't I ask Pat Boone if he would play Thomas Jefferson? And you never know if somebody will be interested in it. And Pat Boone is actually a descendant of Daniel Boone. And so he's got history in his veins. I mean, obviously all of us come from someone, but Daniel Boone was a character within American history. And so he was interested in playing Thomas Jefferson. And there's a scene that we filmed with the death of Thomas Jefferson. What's very interesting about this is that Thomas Jefferson lived 50 years after the signing of the Declaration, and John Adams did too. They had a fairly long life for people at that time in history, but they both ended up dying on the 4th of July, 1826, exactly 50 years after the signing of the Declaration. And many people saw that as a sign from God that their lives had been chosen for a special purpose, and that this was also showing that God had a special place for the nation of America, for the United States, I should say. And that was the sense in the writings of many of the founders. They used that word providence, that there was a providential hand of God on the nation. And as you said, we're going to be showing this film in theaters June 9, 10, and 11. And if people go to AmericanMiracleMovie.com, AmericanMiracleMovie.com, they can see the trailer and read about it, and they can buy tickets there for the movie in advance.
Once again, listen to Refocused Radio, talking to our guest today, Timothy Mahoney. And like you said, make sure you put this on the calendar. Theaters, June 9th, 10th, and the 11th. You make sure you get your ticket and go to the website, AmericanMiracleMovie.com, for more information and for an exciting time. I think history is always important. It's always important to share stories. Stories last from generations to generations. So my next question for you is, when you see how the film was moving in production and working with all long lists of great people behind the scenes, what's some of the film lessons that you see when it comes to the idea of America's success, not just political, but it was spiritual? How do you wrestle with showing all those details without sounding preachy or partisan?
Well, I wanted to be historical, first of all, which meant that I wanted to tell the real story, not a story that didn't exist, that was exaggerated. And I think that I focused on, like I said, the life of George Washington, but then within that, there were other characters that we wanted to bring forward. And we talked about with John Adams. We had him as a character. Abigail Adams was another character that we brought forward. Then there was some people who you wouldn't know. African American characters such as Peter Salem, and Peter Salem was an African American who was a slave, but he was later freed. But he fought at the Battle of Bunker Hill, and this is a story that most people don't know, that he was a hero, because he was very brave, and he fired the one shot that took down an officer. And this officer had been at Lexington and Concord, and he was a British officer. And so when Washington met Peter Salem, and Peter is being played by Cameron Arnett. And some people might know who Cameron Arnett was. He was in Star Trek, and he was also in the recent movie The Forge, and he does a fantastic job, and he's a friend of mine. And I asked him if he would take this role, and he did a fantastic job telling the story of being called as a Minuteman to this battle, and really the toll that it took on the British, what happened at Bunker Hill. Anyway, this particular that's one of the very interesting stories. Another character I have that, as I was thinking about, well, who do I have play this role, is Nicole C. Mullins, the singer, gospel singer. And I had met her briefly, and she had seen some of my earlier films. And the thought just came to me, I wonder if she can act. And she plays a role, Mumbet Freeman. So during the American Revolution, it was an 8-year battle, an 8-year contest, and it ended on the same date as it began, and so she played Mumbet Freeman, and she was a person who had heard about the Declaration of Independence and heard about that people were created in the image of God. And she was heard it multiple times, and she even heard it in the home that she served in. And one time, tragically, she was hit with a hot shovel by her master, and she suffered a terrible injury in her arm. I think it might have made her arm broken or lame or whatever, and burned. And she ends up asked for help, and she wants to be a free person. She doesn't want to be a slave. And we tell that story of Mumbet Freeman. And it's a true historical foundational case, and that was in Massachusetts. And that was the beginning of the abolitionist movement. And so I wanted to have those other stories told about, because the nation can be divided. And they're important stories that I wanted people to know about. And then we take this film all the way through to the Constitution. See, they fought a battle, but what they were trying to understand is, well, once we get our freedom, how are we going to conduct ourselves as a people? And they had the two documents, the Declaration of Independence, and then we tell the story of how the Constitution came into being.
And speaking of division, in today's world where history is often rewritten or reframed, how did you and your team ensure that your storytelling is going to be not just respectful, but also truthful?
Well, you have to go back to original documents. So first of all, this film or this book was historical. And you could look at it. Some people would say, well, you can't say that God acted in all those events, just they were unusual things that happened. Well, a whole succession of events that happened that seems as though they favored the United States seemed odd. But then what I did is I went and got some of the top scholars. So this is a drama that has documentary components to it. It's more on the drama side. I tried to make it more like a drama, but every once in a while we had to come in there, and we had Robert George from Princeton. He's in the movie, and he basically verifies, yes, this happened. Joseph Ellis, 2-time Pulitzer Prize winning author, also was there, and I used their words. And these different scholars have seen the movie, and they feel it's one of the best representations of this story that they've seen. And I've got Akil Reed Amar. He's at Yale. He's the Sterling Professor of Law and Political Science at Yale, and he has briefs before the Supreme Court. He's in the movie, and we're setting we're telling the story so that when you watch this film, it's entertaining, but you're also going to learn something. And I think you're going to learn something because it's current information you need to know right now, because these questions are being asked by so many people right now.
What role does personal faith play in how you interpret the American story? And how did that move you and how you wanted to shape the film?
Well, I am a person of faith, and I think what I could see is that we're told that a lot of the founders were deists. And the word deist, it's not a common word that we use every day, but it means that they believe that there might be a God. They don't know if there's a God, and if he is a God, that he has nothing to do with what's happening right now. They interpret it as God is sort of, created something, and then he went off and he left it alone. But that has been what a number of people, scholars have said, were our founders. They were deists. But that's not what the scholars that I talked with would say. And if you look at the writings of John Adams and George Washington, they used the word providence as a kind of a acceptable word, because they had a lot of different parts of the colonies, the different states that were there. They had different religious groups, and they were divided at a time. And so as a person of faith, I was looking to see, well, what did these other people write about? That's how we know what they said and what did they believe. And they all signed the Declaration of Independence that talked about a creator. And they understood two things. One is that people were made in the image of God. And where did they get that from? Robert George from Princeton will tell you they got it from the book of Genesis. And not only that, but they also know that all these political systems that came before, let's say a king would do whatever he wants. He would do whatever he wanted to, regardless of whether it was right for other people, because he was the king. And that's what the founders realized, that there are certain inalienable rights that people have that are endowed by their creator. Have life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. And that's the way God created us. But kings, they could just say, hey, I want your property, or I want you to do this. I'm going to send you to war. You have no freedoms or anything. And that's the way it had been for several thousand years. These colonists, they looked back and reflected deeply, and they wrote this document. First, they had a declaration, and then when they got to the Constitution, there was another pillar that they realized, is that according to the book of Genesis, that men were fallen. They had a sinful nature, and that they would do things to other people that are very selfish and wrong. And so they had to come up with a constitution that would recognize the rights of individuals and also recognize the sinful nature. And with those two pillars, they wrote this constitution so that they could separate power, so that the executive branch and the legislative and the judicial are different powers, and they're in keeping them separate. So, and it doesn't mean that we've been perfect at doing this, because people are human and they don't follow the guidelines. And so at times, Robert George will talk about this, that there has been, we've failed, and he used the word sin. We've sinned, and we've not been good people to others. But that doesn't mean that the Constitution was wrong. It means that the people didn't follow it.
That's good. Once again, listen, Refocused Radio, watching us today online, talking to our special guest today, Timothy Mahoney. Don't forget, mark your calendars for June 9th, 10th, and 11th, and go to the website, AmericanMiracleMovie.com. The movie, The American Miracle, Our Nation is No Accident. My next question for you is, when you think about conversations that this possibly will spark on social media and hopefully in homes of America and abroad, what do you hope that this film will spark as far as classrooms, churches, and families?
Well, I think that they should see that there was something going on that not only did the Americans recognize, but the British recognize that there was a protection that allowed this nation to become into existence. And something that's not in this movie, but there was something called the Great Awakening that happened prior to the revolution, and that awakening was with it was multiple people, but George Whitefield was a person that came over and was preaching, and he was preaching and asking people to pray one nation under God. And Benjamin Franklin was actually a friend of George Whitefield's, and so they did that because there was a lot of division, and we have a lot of division right now. With different people and different viewpoints. And, there's this idea of separation of church and state. Well, I think the founding fathers didn't want one particular denomination or church, in other words, the Puritans or the Methodists or the Baptists, to be in control. But there wasn't separation from God and state, because in their writings and in the documents and in all of these different covenants that were made up of states, and that there was always references, most of the time, many times, to God. So they know they had different theological viewpoints, but they weren't excommunicating God from the nation. And that's what this film is about. I think that it's to remember other nations that get rid of God, all of a sudden they have a completely different, it's right is might, or might is right, I should say. They're forcing people to do things. So the foundation of our rights come from some higher power than a king or president, and this idea is to respect those rights. So that dignity, that we should see dignity in other people. And I think that that's what I came away from after making this film and going through all those interviews and telling the story, was that all these different people groups that I might not agree with, all are made in the image of God, and I should be civil to them, and I should treat them with dignity. And yet we have to know that we all are fallen. And so we have to have this balance to try to know how to live. And then there is, if we do things that are wrong, we need to repent and stop doing them. And I think for me, I think people should not be discouraged by the nation, but that they'll be thankful for being in this country. And Michael Medved, the author of the book, that's his main view, is that when people see this, they should be thankful that the Bible says that God chooses the time for people to live in the times and centuries and locations. And I think that we should be thankful for what we have, and we need to be a participant to make sure that it doesn't go away. Richard Dreyfuss is in this movie, and he has that concern about the fact that we haven't had any classes in civics for probably 50 or 60 years. It's been removed. So people don't know how to be civil and don't understand about civics. And that's a big concern. And he believes that we are in a dangerous place, that we could lose the nation that we all love because of not understanding how the nation is meant to operate. So that's I guess several things that I think people would take away.
When you look through the lens of history, and you also look through the lens of today's modern media, do you believe that there's still room for films like this to continue to be produced?
Well, I sure hope so. I think that that's the whole idea of being able to be have freedom to basically make films. This film is basically a historical testimony. I'm just bringing it. I'm taking that lens, as you used the term, and I'm focusing it on certain events and editing those events together. So this film is inspiring, and you're going to be able to see miraculous things that happened in George Washington's life, and then his life was prepared to be the leader of the nation. And I think he knew that he had some special protection because he took incredible risk. They, when you make a movie, you can't tell all the stories, but there's just so many stories where God protected and weather instances that had happened. You're going to see a lot of that in this film. You're going to see the battles and the ups and downs that and the courage. I think that people had tremendous courage, but they believed that they were doing something that was right. And I think if we can learn from anything, it's that we need to do the things that are right and be courageous. Actually, there's a verse in the Bible that I've used at times, and I have to remind myself of it, which is to be strong and courageous and to do the work. And sometimes this life, it makes you just want to sort of run away. And you take comfort in the fact that there is a God and that he knows who we are. And by the way, Benjamin Franklin gives this amazing speech in this movie when they're in a battle about the Constitution. And he says, can a sparrow fall to the ground without his notice? Well, then how can a nation rise, to become a nation without God's notice? And he calls people to prayer. Benjamin Franklin. And many scholars would say that he was a deist. He didn't believe that God acted. Well, it's not true. His writings, he flirted with that, is my understanding, for a while in his life. But he was a part of the Great Awakening with George Whitefield. He was a friend of George Whitefield's. He printed his sermons. So somebody who's, we've been told was a deist would be a participant in that. So that's the thing that you need to know, and our audience needs to know, is that a lot of these men that went before us to help to create this nation believe that God acted, that his presence would be a part of the nation. And I think that's the message today is that God, I think, wants to be a part of all of us. There's a verse that says, for he so loved the world. And so I think that this film should just be a great encouragement to people and to help us as we approach the 250th anniversary, because there's going to be a lot of other stories out there about this nation, but this is the one. It's based on all sorts of historical events and the actual words out of people's mouths for the most part, as much as we could, because we got the letters and we got recorded information. So it's as accurate as we possibly could make it.
One might make the point also that the miracle continues. And with that said, and our closing thoughts, we'll remind everyone who's watching and listening to us to go to the website, AmericanMiracleMovie.com. The movie entitled The American Miracle, Our Nation is No Accident, in theaters, June 9th, 10th, and 11th. We've been talking to our special guest today, Timothy Mahoney. I want to say not just thank you for your time, but before we officially sign off, one final thought here. When someone sees this film and walks away changed, what do you hope that change looks like?
Well, you ask very, very good questions. I think that number one is that people would see that God acts in a history, and that I believe I grew up in a broken home. And my mother raised four of us, and my dad wasn't around, and we just came to a place. My mother's faith was such that she believed. I grew up on welfare, and Thursdays were garage sale day, and we would pray about, could I get a pair of shoes? And I would pray for a particular kind of shoe, and she was able to go out and at a garage sale and find something, and I'd come home with faith. And I think that this film is about people trusting God and having a dialogue with God. And there are times when George Washington and Ben Franklin and these others, other founders, placed the fact that they believed they were doing the right thing and that they had to trust God with the outcome. And I think we're in the same place today. And I think that we need to be civil to each other and teach each other or learn from this film that we're all created in the image of God, and we need to, understand and be civil to each other. And I think that's my hope, is that this film will be a unifying film and not a divisive film. And I think what I'm seeing so far, it is, and it has been.
Well, mark your calendars. Theaters, this movie is going to be available June 9th, 10th, and 11th. Visit the website, AmericanMiracleMovie.com. We've been talking to the one and only Timothy Mahoney, the director of the film, The American Miracle. Our nation is no accident. Like always, want to say to you, sir, thank you for your time.
Well, thank you. And you know what? It's urgent to buy tickets now because we're only in theaters for 3 days. You want to get your tickets, you can buy them online right now. So you can go to that website and you can find the theater near you. And thank you again for having me. I really appreciate it.